Hey everybody, Tim Hughes here, CEO and co-founder of DLA Ignite. Welcome to Artificial Intelligence Transform podcast. Welcome to Ed.
Hi folks, Ed Fowler back again, and I think today we're talking about gaming in depth, aren't we, Tim? I think the articles are up.
We are, yes. Which is I'm not a gamer, so it is always fascinating learning about what gaming is all about. But all of the articles that we're going to be talking about are in the excuse me, the show notes on my profile. So if you're looking to go, there's some YouTube videos and some articles that you might be interested in.
Excellent. Thanks for those. Just to sort of contextualize the point, I mean, I know gaming can be seen as, unless you're a gamer, can be seen as like a kind of a small thing, almost a niche thing, like a hobby thing. But just to contextualize this, gaming is currently worth about $250 billion a year in terms of revenue, and it's projected to hit $500 billion a year by the end of the decade.
That means, and one of the articles that you shared is from Bain & Co. You know,
yeah,
like
this is a really serious industry.
This is a serious industry.
And just to give you some other sort of contexts, that's bigger than movies and music put together.
Right.
It's bigger than TV. So all of that sort of attention that you see focused on this, and it's seen as the only growing area of media. So gaming grows year on year north of 10%. Whereas TV revenues, movie revenues, etc., go up and down, but actually have been trending downwards for a while because people move to an interactive form of entertainment. But we'll start from kind of that sort of why this is so important for AI. So some estimates suggest that humanity spends 600 billion hours a year gaming, which is about 1% of all human activity, which is it's an enormous number no matter what. But unlike, shall we say, other areas like, I don't know, going to work or sleeping, every single part of this activity is parameterized. So if you're just a casual gamer playing a game on your phone, that game, especially if it's a free game, is sending huge amounts of data back to its publishers, basically saying where you are, what time of day it is for you, what device you're on. And for some of them, particularly more data hungry ones, they can even tell what your heart rate is. They can sort of start determining lots of stuff about you. Now, for the more, so we say, expensive, in-depth games like top-end console games, top-end sort of PC games, they're not just looking at those sort of mechanical details around you, but they're actually extracting huge amounts of data about how you play the game. And that data can be abstracted, not just to write new games, and as we see, not just to power the AIs, but that can be a rich source for other real-world situations. We spoke briefly about in the past how the German defense ministries and some of the gaming platforms are allegedly effectively retruing up the computer games based on the training algorithms based on outputs of computer games, but also feeding that back into real-world weapons platforms. So we're going to examine.
And one of the articles that you share actually mentions that as well.
Yeah, it's vast. So we're going to start down from the one that we shared about, which is basically the Nvidia top level sort of presentation they did at their sort of big show this year. And the CEO of Nvidia came up and basically says using AI, which is at the back end of his demo is ChatGPT, which is mostly powered by Nvidia chips. Nvidia is the GPU manufacturer, and GPUs, distinct from, shall we say, CPUs, GPUs, graphics processing units, can support highly tailored algorithms, which are used to power AIs. They sit on huge numbers of specialist chips that aren't a million miles away from the stuff that's inside a gaming PC or a console. And Nvidia shows a video where you can talk to an NPC. So you're not just typing into it, you can talk to it, and it has, whilst it's got a branching tree, the AI is powering the speech recognition of what you're saying and be able to map ambiguity to the game's branching narrative. So you can have game choices. And that was seen at the time as quite revolutionary. Now, what's happened is people have dived into this, and for certain very still popular but highly moddable or modifiable games, they've started bolting this into the background. So instead of having one of the examples I showed was a video of somebody who's done it for Skyrim, which is not a particularly modern game now, but still very popular because it's easy to play with and easy to engage with. The NPCs now have a much richer story. They're not just responding with 2 or 3 examples of pre-canned script. And your conversation with them isn't just helping the computer decide which of those 2 or 3 examples you meant about. These are fully featured, created on the fly conversations. And for some of the latest mods, the characters actually have a backstory, which is now talking about effectively what the character knows about itself and knows about you. And some people have been putting semi-distressing videos up of characters that they believe are self-aware. And obviously a lot of people have written fiction about characters that are self-aware. So that's easily accessible as a model. But essentially these mods are now saying is, well, we can provide a backstory to each of these characters that isn't just, hello, how are you, Tim? It's much richer. The character can now have motivations. And one of the things that's coming about now in the latest generation of games, and one that's come out recently, is called Starfield. Starfield is a very popular, large-scale game. There's 10 million users. And to give you a hint of the revenue of this, these are about $100 each. And you've got 10 million of them. So you're very easily cresting a 5 sort of billion total projection. They've got $1 billion in revenue already. And that's 6 weeks old, is this game. So to give you this sort of expanding from that point, this game has 200 to 300 non-player characters that one can identify with. They've expanded these non-player characters from just a body that walks around in a location. These characters are what they call modeled lives. So the characters have a home base. The characters have a place to go to work. They have a place where you go and interact with them in leisure things. It's the same character. Now, one of the ways that the developers have done this, they've had to hard code this. They've had to script this. But some of the latest mods are generating new characters that the whole thing is generated by an AI. So the AI generates the modeled life. It knows that it's supposed to go to these areas. So instead of somebody laboriously scripting and testing all this, an AI just creates it on the fly. So you will meet people when the game is generated, or you will meet people as you interact with a new area. The AI creates their entire backstory, plus their modeled life, plus the locations they're in, and can even work on perhaps how the character looks, which means your game experience will be unlike any other human's game. It's now totally different, which again is now fed by data power, and all this type of stuff is coming through. Now, that depth of complexity was simply not possible until without heroic efforts. So some indications say that Bethesda, who are the publisher of this game, Starfield, which have a small hint of this, spent over $1 billion developing this game. This is 8 or 9 years of very solid development teams. This is development teams in the hundreds. This is development teams creating assets on top of it. And that's without any startlingly new technology. It's a game engine they've had for a while. This is creating assets and stories and testing. The new AIs can not just do a chunk of that work. So effectively, the product of these AAA games is going to get a lot larger. These stories can be richer, more interactive, more attuned to you. We're calling it real-time narrative as this thing. It's not just like real-time interaction. It's real-time storytelling. The story itself becomes richer. But also this has some significant implications on the development pathways of these games. So Bethesda employs several thousand people. And you've already seen some of the studies that are shared that organizations are starting to get into effectively, 80% of them saying we're going to get rid of developers. We're going to get rid of people who create story. We're going to get rid of testers because the AIs can test the game. They could act as the player and play it through and flag results. They can create narrative and story. They may be able to create assets. So you get a thinner glaze of this, which has some profound implications about an industry which globally employs more than 1 million people. And these aren't 1 million people who've been radically offshored or anything. These are 1 million people who, on average, take home over $50,000 a year. These aren't junior resources. These aren't somehow sort of forgotten offshore resources, etc. These are visible resources. So there's going to be some implications about policy. You've seen the current strikes that the SGA and the screenwriters are having over the use of AI in films, which is mostly looking at the talent base. You're going to see the start of strikes from these individuals and sort of actors and writers about the impact of gaming on their talent base, because this is a nice little revenue earner for a lot of actors and writers. But actually, the biggest impact is going to hit fair and square on the technology teams that underpin this. There's going to be a huge shift there. Now, I think one of the things that the actors are going to start striking here, they're a bit late, is the main thing. So there's two forms of acting in a game. There's banner headlining. So you have, let's get Idris Elba, perhaps in a game.
Yep.
It helps you sell it, but you're selling on Idris's name. However, most of the sort of other actors, there is enough already pre-scanned individuals. There was a story from about 10 years ago as this first started, where they offered free copies of a game to everybody that entered their office and would agree to be scanned. So in one game, they'd scan the FedEx guy, and another game they'd scan the delivery teams, and another scan they scanned the receptionist. None of those individuals knew what they were really signing up for, but their basic parameters as a human being have been echoed and repeated inside games ever since. Now, you could say that's pretty unethical. You haven't explained to everybody that their echoes are going through. But what's going to happen now is the AIs are going to start creating characters, human-like characters, that don't have any implications. And I think what an awful lot of the current media is talking about is this first-order stuff. I am a famous actor. I am a jobbing actor. I'm an extra. They will use my likeness. They will use my voice. They're not going to use your actors and your voice. They know what a human being looks like. They know what a voice sounds like. They can make it up. You're not also going to see as much of a shift where you're seeing these banner headlines. The last big one has probably been a game called Cyberpunk 2077, which is Keanu Reeves as a big story player in that. And he was part of the production team and got very involved in it. I don't think that's going to happen as often because you're going to see more and more of the silent protagonist. So your character doesn't say anything. You say it instead of the character. So you don't need an actor playing you.
Yep.
Second thing is you're going to see a richer world. And if you're trying to build in sort of player intimacy and player immersion, meeting Keanu Reeves or meeting Idris Elba doesn't help your immersion in the game, even if they're playing a character. So I think that particular strike isn't going to have huge amounts of impact. You may just see a lot of games that don't have famous people in it. I'm not entirely sure you're going to notice the difference. But that is just the wave now. This next wave is this massive depth and complexity, which is going to have some really profound implications for the business. Number one is about 10% of business is these high-end games. There's a huge amount of these low-end games, but 10%, which is say 25, 30 billion a year, is these top-end games, which require significant investment in the player on a platform, on the game itself, and the player expects a certain amount of return. You've either got these online games where you're playing other human beings, or you're immersing yourself in the narrative. And this year in gaming has been about these solo games. They're not online, they're not multiplayer, where you immerse yourself in a rich and very compelling narrative. Now, in those games, there is a significant downstream tail that makes up a very large amount of their revenue return called downloadable content, which is additional story components, additional compelling things for you to do, new characters or whatever. They're not just in-game cosmetics. They're not, shall we say, yeah, you can download an extra gun or you can download a pretty picture for your car. These are new and quite complex areas. And that's a business in itself that's worth $30 billion a year in downloadable content of narrative. Now, that entire business is now under threat. You're not going to see that same additional model because the games of 2024, 2025 will have that evolving storyline in them. You may be able to download some different parameters that help with the game's evolution. But the actual idea that you're going to run out story in a game simply isn't going to happen anymore.
But they must come up with some other way to monetize.
Well, this is quite interesting. So there's a small industry at the moment. It's small. It's about $7 billion a year. It's called in-game advertising. Okay. And most of that is targeted to, the sponsors. You imagine you're playing a football game. You're playing a car racing game. There are adverts if you are at a football pitch. You were adverts as if you were at a race meet. Yep. There is that degree of advertising. It's basically in-game banners. Right. And that's something that's real. They're starting to get quite clever. Those banners switch out and become contextual to you rather than just... And obviously there's game sponsorship as well, where people want to put this through. But there's a new field that's starting to come. If we're calling it sort of real-time narrative creation, there's real-time narrative advertising, which is a much richer advertising model. Now, this is a tiny middle. I call out a couple of links in there of companies that are starting to look at it. But the primary thing you're looking at there is the injection of a compelling need for you to interact with a brand. Rather than I'm driving along in a car racing game, I see a poster go by that goes Pirelli. Great. See Pirelli, tick. It's about the same as advertising as you would see if you saw it at the race meet itself or at a Grand Prix. Same as if you're playing a football game, you'll see sponsorship by Adidas or advertising at the back of it. They're not hugely good advertising. In fact, some research suggests it's actually less interacted with than if you saw them just in the real world because your attention is focused on the game.
Yep.
Now, one of the things that this real-time narrative advertising model is looking at is how do I create ways to interact with the player without reducing their immersion? So you could have, say, in a role-playing game, an important reason why you needed to interact with somebody who makes a torch or a battery or a tent.
Or wear a pair of Nikes.
Or wear a pair of Nikes. But there is a reason that would be a pair of Nikes instead of a pair of Adidas. And it would be something you can weave into the narrative. Now, actually, as I mentioned sort of at the beginning, gaming is extremely parameterized in a way that no other form of entertainment or even human activity is. That means that you can tune that narrative advertising very easily. The game AI can look at the way you're interacting profile and start making decisions about you and to what new interaction it's going to service up. So there's some thoughts around basically almost like narrative. You see at the moment, there's like add word, add buy. You can buy words for search. You may be able to have a similar market for narrative attention or player immersion. How much is it going to cost me to broadcast to a game which is currently being played? So if we look at the two sort of AAA games of this year, one's called Baldur's Gate 3, another one's called Starfield. They have concurrent player bases of 500,000 people and 200. So 750,000 people are playing this right now. What's it worth to get 30 seconds of their narrative attention? What's that worth in terms of a price point or a model? Yeah. Now that becomes a very, very interesting model. And that's powered purely by the data flow from games and the relevant AI that you're putting in the back of it. And that's going to see an area where there's going to be a huge amount of competition. Not just from the, shall we say, the game platform providers, a sort of a Microsoft, a Sony, a Valve, etc., but also the game developers themselves. How do I write effectively evolving narrative that I can monetize and would increase effectively the retention of the gamer in my platform? Now, we've seen some hints of this in gaming over the last 5 years, that gaming becomes almost like a TV channel. They started to refer to things, and one of the games you see out there is Fortnite. It's a bit of a plague. You either love the game and therefore are about 8 years old, or you absolutely despise the game and you're every age after that. But Fortnite and other games release effectively game content in seasons. They refer to it as seasons. This is season 12, season 13, etc. That narrative sort of pulse and wave is something that they've borrowed off TV, because they're regarding these things as not just a game, but a platform that you can either put in sponsor content or advertising content. So this is now becoming a very rapid area of innovation. And to sort of boil it back to where we were speaking at the beginning, the sort of screen actors and the sort of writers, that's an area they're missing out on, because this is, they're focusing on the game itself. It's great, but actually an awful lot of these individuals make a lot of money from acting in and scripting adverts. They're not just selling their image, and that will now very rapidly go on, because this idea of a human being having to be the anchor point of an advert may not be true at all.
Well, it's a bit like football players or soccer players.
Exactly.
Which is when they're being transferred, they're actually also selling their rights. Is the right to have the name on the back of the
the image, etc., and reuse that in other content.
Yeah.
And I think you're going to see now is this also pitch towards multimedia. Now, at the moment, there's been a lot of cheesy tie-ins. You've seen a game which has a film of it, and they're usually not great. Or you have a game which leads to a TV series like The Witcher, which was okay. But you're going to see that much more happening in real time. You're going to see, as the fidelity of these games starts approaching beyond photorealism in real time, this interaction will now start becoming. You've already seen a nascent esports capability where people just go and watch other people play and effectively root for their team. What you're also going to see is a form of narrative, not quite voyeurism, but narrative sort of sharing or collective narrative. People will start watching other players, not for the performance in the game, but for the quality of the narrative that they are engendering from the game. You will start seeing different skill sets emerging as the sort of human player and AI interaction will become an attractive point, not just for the advertisers, but for other viewers.
So this is the Twitch.
Beyond that, actually. So Twitch is still you, and effectively the game, the Twitch viewer is looking over the game.
Yes, so for those that don't know, Twitch is a platform where you can watch people gaming.
Yeah, and watch people gaming, you start interacting with the personalities. This is going to be, you're going to be in the game, interacting on a narrative. And at the moment, people do, it's called stream sniping. So I'm a Twitch streamer, I'm doing some stuff. Somebody jumps into my game and tries to kill me, usually in the game. It's seen as bad ethics, it's bad etiquette, etc. But this is going to be a different ways. You're going to see effectively a different form of matchmaking, which isn't about how good am I in this 30-second sort of combat of wills, but actually how good am I at burnishing or increasing a narrative. Now, this is touched on in sci-fi 25, 30 years ago, but is now becoming actually something that's truly capable. The platforms exist for this. The ability to share the content, the ability now to generate narrative. Effectively, two human beings can be playing a game where the rest of the game is generated completely on the fly. And you're not going to be tripping over the sort of fourth wall problem where the narrative runs out. Or you're not going to be tripping over effectively, this is no longer the same sort of platform as I started playing on. It becomes something else. That can be pushed back. And this is going to give a huge new industry that's going to make people an awful lot of money. If you can imagine that Twitch itself is turning over between 10 to $15 billion by some estimates. If you take the complete sort of value chain, that could easily be doubled or tripled by this new value chain that will be emerging. So there's going to be fascinating change. And this might sound like I've been doing a lot of sci-fi. One of the articles I included in the list there was about a Swedish company called Spectarium, which has just received its second round of funding to generate an engine. And I've seen the demo of it. It does generate new content on the fly that fits in with both the narrative envelope of the game, but actually your intentions as a character and the way you've been playing it. So instead of you playing a role and having to alter behavior, the universe fits and matches to the way you play the game. And it's an area of not just very rapid growth, but I think some fascinating sort of deeper conversations, not just in terms of which money you're playing, but the impacts for humanity and the impacts for the million or so people that work in the trade. It's going to be very interesting.
Ed, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
It always fascinating. And I just sit here and I just sponge it up.
Well, I hope
I'm deeply honoured for you to come on and share your knowledge with us. It's just awesome.
Fantastic. And next week, not next week, week after, we'll have to work out what we're talking about. I have a suspicion we'll be talking about AI in finance. I think it's probably
excellent. I'm looking forward to it.
Fantastic. Folks,
thanks Ed. Thanks everybody. Thanks for watching.